If you would, go ahead and grab your Bibles and open up to Colossians chapter 4. Colossians 4. We're continuing our weekend focus on how Christians are supposed to interact with the outside world. And there are some words, some commands from Paul here. They're going to be our focus, the focus of our thoughts tonight. Colossians 4. If you were here for the singing in the last hour, in the very last song we sang, Exalted, was written by Matt Bassford, a name I know that is very familiar to a lot of the people that are in this room. And it was exactly this time last year when my wife and my mother and I were in Texas for Matt's funeral. Matt was a very dear friend of mine. And when he was finally done with his long and painful battle with ALS, I wanted to be there. And at the funeral, I learned that in the final weeks of his life, even while curled up in pain and struggling to breathe, Matt spent that time and the energy that he had to study the Bible with his home care nurse. And just days before he died, that woman was baptized. As his life was ending, he was working to help that woman gain eternal life. That exemplifies our focus of Jesus' words to let your light shine that we talked about last night. And it serves as the example of the dedication that Paul talks about here in Colossians chapter 4. So I want to start by saying that I think there's just a really unfortunate chapter break between chapter 3 and chapter 4 here. I know they're needed. I know they're useful for organizing information in the Bible, but sometimes those chapter breaks are just in bad places, and I happen to think that this is one of them. Go back just to chapter 3 a little bit. Start looking in verse 18. We're not going to read it, but I want your eyes there. Paul starts talking about all these different kinds of relationships. He starts saying something to wives, and then in verse 19, he talks to husbands, and then he moves on to children in verse 20, and then he says something specifically to fathers in verse 21, and then in verse 22, he starts talking about servants at the end of the chapter. And then chapter 4 begins with Paul talking to masters, servants, and then masters. Those should be going together, don't you think? He's still talking about relationships too at the beginning of chapter 4. So why the chapter break? I don't know. I did not sit in on that plan or that meeting. I might have said something, but maybe not. I don't know. And I would like to suggest to you that Paul is still going to be talking about relationships all the way to the end of the book. Look at verse 7 of chapter 4. He's wrapping up his letter with some familiar greetings and some messages to people that he knows in that congregation, and he passes along some love with some people that they know. But verses 2 through 6, he is still talking about how we're supposed to behave in another kind of relationship. Now, chapter 4, verse 2 starts by telling us to continue steadfastly in prayer. So you might assume that prayer is the next topic, and that makes sense. Prayer is a huge topic for Paul, but we haven't read far enough yet. He's still talking about relationships, and becomes clear when we get to verse 5. Now, let me go ahead and give away the next specific relationship before we start talking about it. Because in verse 5, he says to walk in wisdom towards outsiders. Paul has some really specific things to tell us about our relationship with people that are not Christians. Our relationship with a lost world. There's some things he wants us to be mindful of when dealing with them, and there's some things that we need to be doing. So tonight we are going to look at what Paul tells us through the Colossians about our relationship with these outsiders. Now, brothers and sisters, the Bible is still relevant today. These messages, though they were written thousands of years ago to vastly different people, those messages are still true. They are still useful to disciples of this time as well. That was how the Holy Spirit designed it, so that every Christian from every age could read them and learn from them. And this text here is still so very relevant for us today. We have relationships with lost people. We can't avoid that. We're not supposed to avoid that, actually. And as the world seems to grow more hostile to you and me as disciples, we have to make sure that our view of the world doesn't change. Because it's so easy. It is so easy to see the world as the enemy and isolate ourselves from them, and then along the way forget we have a calling. We have a mission to outsiders. There is a God-designed work that we are supposed to be doing to the lost that is all around us. They are not our enemies. They're our mission field. So there's 3 phrases. Again, 3 points. Good preacher training, 3 points. But there's 3 phrases in the text that I think really sort of frame up for us what the Spirit wants us to know about our relationships with outsiders. So let's read the passage first, and then we'll unpack those 3 phrases. So Colossians chapter 4, verses 2 through 6. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the world to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I might make it clear which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. All right, so 3 phrases pulled out of this text that I would like for us to focus on. Paul starts off by telling us to continue steadfastly in prayer. Now, your translation might say devoted to prayer. Now, I know most of you. I know that you are praying people. Excuse me. I want you to think back on the last week. Can you think of the people that you prayed for? Can you remember the names that were on your list that you brought before God? How many people on your list that you prayed for last week were lost people? I got to admit that as I thought back on that, I was a little bit embarrassed. I pray for family. I pray for relatives. I pray for my church. I pray for preachers traveling to other countries. I didn't do a lot of praying for lost people last week. And Paul tells us we need to be doing this. He says, don't stop doing this. You might be tempted to stop because you think you're getting nowhere, but you need to keep on doing it. And then you need to be watchful in it and thankful. Thankful. Prayers answered. Now, you might be tempted because you think I'm not getting anywhere, but you need to keep on doing it. What is Paul saying when he's saying being watchful in prayer? Thankful. I think thankful we understand, but watchful in it? Now, there's some different commentaries with some different ideas about what these phrases mean, but the one that makes the most sense to me contextually is that he's urging us that as we keep praying, we need to keep watching for God to actually answer these prayers. And when he does, we need to be thankful. And I wonder how good we are at that sometimes. I am really good at just kind of throwing stuff up to God and waiting. And then when I feel like he didn't answer me, I get disappointed. Maybe the problem is I'm not being watchful for the answers that he did actually give me. I mean, this could be a lesson on prayer because there's some really good stuff here. But Paul moves on because in verse 3, he says, at the same time, be praying for us, right? He starts the book by saying, I'm praying for you. And now at the close of the book, he's saying, hey, keep praying for me as well. Seems fair. But Paul has a specific prayer request, doesn't he? Verse 3 says he wants them to pray that God will open a door for them that they can preach through. Pray also for us that God may open to us a door for the word, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear how I ought to speak. He's thinking about his need to speak to outsiders. That's where he's going with this, which I think is really interesting because it also mentions that he just happens to be in prison here for doing this very thing. When it comes to what they could be praying for to God on his behalf, what does he ask? Listen, I tell you, if I was in prison, I'd be saying, hey, pray to God that I get out of here, or that I am at least kept safe while I am in here. That's not what Paul asks of them. He wants them to pray about his work in the gospel. And I think that the reason for that, for Paul, is that there is something of a higher priority than his personal freedom or comfort. Bigger than all of that is the need for the gospel to be shared. Man, is that at the top of my prayer request too? Do I want more people to know Jesus more than I want freedom or comfort? He wants the Colossians to pray that God's going to do two things, right? The first one is that God will open doors, all right? I think we can figure out what that means. He's asking that God will create an opportunity where he can share the message with those that are outside of Christ. Do we pray for that? Do we pray that God will open doors? Because you know what? He has not left us all on our own when it comes to this mission towards outsiders. He doesn't leave us all to ourselves. He promises to be with us and to help us. So we need to call on him, probably a lot more than we do, so that he will create opportunities to share the gospel with the lost. I'll bet right now you've got somebody in your life that you would like to share the gospel with, maybe a coworker, a neighbor, maybe even a family member. And I bet at some point you have thought this to yourself. And I say this because I've thought this to myself. It's like, man, I would really like to talk to them about Jesus, but it just never comes up. There's never an opportunity to go there. I've thought that before. Have you? Maybe our prayers just need to be loaded with pleading. God, help me, I need a door. That's probably something I need to be praying for every single day. God, please open a door in the life of this person so that they can know the truth. Maybe that's what we need to be doing here, just like Paul's doing. Ask for other disciples to pray for me so that a door might be opened in this friend's life, because I want them to know Jesus. Paul asks them to pray that God will open a door so that they can declare the mysteries of God, right? Hey, pray that God is going to open a door, and then pray that I'm going to walk through it. Paul is not asking, hey, pray that God takes care of these lost people. He's saying, pray for a door so that I can go to them. These kinds of prayers are not a way for God to work instead of us. It's so that God can work with us In fact, brothers and sisters, in evangelism, there is this beautiful partnership between us and God. Have you ever thought about that? He lets us work with him in ministering to outsiders. I need to pray that God will make opportunities, and then my job is to have the courage to take them. Continue steadfastly in prayer. Watch for God to open that door, and then be thankful when he does. The second phrase that I want us to think on is in verse 5. I've already said walk in wisdom towards outsiders, but I kind of like the NASB that says to conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders. All right, so there's kind of a transition here. Verses 2 through 4, we're talking about our prayers, and now he's going to start talking about our conduct. And he urges us to be careful and wise as we go out into the world and interact with people that are lost. Now, aren't we supposed to always be wise? All the time? At the beginning of this book, in chapter 1 and verse 9, Paul prays that we would always be filled with spiritual wisdom and understanding. I suppose we're supposed to be wise all the time, and yet at the end, he specifies that when you're interacting with outsiders, you need to be especially wise, especially careful. Why is that? Well, think about how Jesus saw outsiders. They were not his enemies. They were victims ensnared by the adversary. They are lost souls that need to be rescued. That is the most important thing about outsiders in the eyes of Jesus. Do we see them like that? They are not co-workers. They are not waitresses. They are not even slow drivers in the left lane on 55. They are lost people facing a terrible fate in desperate need of rescue. I need to see people at their most important level, just like Jesus does. And what Paul's admonishing here is that when I find myself among them, I need to make sure that my light is shining brightly. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," Matthew 5, and it needs to shine before men so that they see our good works and glorify our Father who is in heaven. That's what we spent all last night talking about. I want them to see me reflecting the light of Jesus. And you can see why when you get to the end of verse 5, because we want to make the very best use of the time that we have. Every opportunity we are given can impact them so that they might listen to us about Jesus. I want to seize every door that I see opened. I don't want to do anything that might jeopardize them believing me when I tell them that I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. And you kind of know what I'm talking about, don't you? There's the way the story goes is that there was a police officer that was driving down the road when he saw one car cut off another car. Now, no accident happened. Technically, no law was broken. He was going to let it go until he saw one woman lean out of her car window and just start talking ugly and let's just say colorful as she was talking to that other driver. And then the police officer, the state trooper, he noticed that there was a "What would Jesus do" sticker on the back of that woman's car, and there was a cross hanging from her windshield. So he decided to pull her over. And she said, "Well, what are you pulling me over for?" He says, "Well, ma'am, I heard what you said, and then I saw what was on the bumper, and I thought this car might have been stolen. And that the real owner might want it back." We need to make sure that we don't do anything that's going to jeopardize our possibility that somebody else is going to learn about Jesus from me. I don't want to do anything that might become an unnecessary obstacle to somebody hearing the gospel. Because brothers and sisters, you just never know. As we make our way day by day through this life, we just don't know when God's going to suddenly throw open a door for us. there's going to be an opportunity right there to start talking to somebody about Jesus. And it might be just planting a seed, but that seed might start them on a journey that's going to benefit them eternally. But if we do something that damages the possibility of that seed ever even taking root, well, if Paul wants us to be wise, then the opposite would be foolishness, wouldn't it? It would be foolish for us to act this way. Now, I don't know how or why, but our 5-year-old Molly, she got it into her head a little while ago that a fool is a bad guy. And I've really come to like her definition. Now, there's a difference between ignorance and foolishness, but the scriptures tell us not to listen to fools and not to be fools ourselves. So yeah, fools are bad guys. When God opens a door for us, that moment is precious. And in some cases, when it comes to people that we really love and care about, those moments are rare. And we know that. So be wise. As I interact with lost people throughout the course of my day, do they see Christ in me? And please remember, we interact with lots of lost people, not just face to face anymore. Even if you rarely leave your home, you can interact with the lost on a global scale. Would you agree with me? I have often said that if I could add a new verse to that children's song, I would say, "Be careful, little fingers, what you type." I think that we need to be reminded that walking in wisdom towards outsiders means I really need to think about what I'm posting on social media. I think this is a particular area where God's people need to show a little bit more wisdom. If people see what I post on social media, that's going to be seen by a very large and very diverse crowd. Would you agree with me on that? Your social feed is probably pretty similar to mine. When I post something, even if it's just my friends list, that includes all of my family. My sisters, their husbands, my brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, cousins, my wife's cousins, second cousins, third cousins, second cousins twice removed. I don't know how that works, but they're in there somehow. Aunts and uncles on both sides of the family, grandparents, great-grandparents in some cases, and that's just family. And not all of them are Christians. Is it that way for you? And beyond that family, there's my spiritual family at Joliet and other Christians that I know all over the country, and even some Christians in other parts of the world. They can see the things that I post on social media. Maybe you've got connections like that too. And you're probably connected to coworkers through social media. Somehow, we've become friends with our kids' teachers over the years, and even though they have not been in that classroom for years, we still know what's going on in their life, and they still know what's going on in our life by the things that we post. Do you got connections like that? And I'm connected to friends that I went to high school with that I have not seen for 30 years. Last year was my 30th anniversary of graduating high school. I haven't laid eyes on them since 1993, but I still know what's going on in their lives. And they still know what's going on mine. Do you have a few friends like that? How many outsiders see what you post? Please really think about this question with me. Do I take into account how the words that I post are going to be seen by everybody in my collection of friends? Have I posted something that's going to shut down an opportunity for them to know Jesus? Yeah, but that person lives on the other side of the country. Are there Christians there? Did your post hinder some Christian that does live near them from sharing the gospel? And I especially bring this up because what's happening next month in our country? Does everybody in your friends group have the exact same political views that you do? My collection of friends on social media is pretty diverse. Every spot on the political spectrum is represented by the people that see my posts, and I guarantee yours are the same. You may not know it, but they are. And there's some people that we agree with, right? There's some people we disagree with, but we can understand why they feel that way. And there's some people that quietly in the back of our minds, we think they're a little unhinged and nutty. How do all of those people feel about the meme that I think is funny, pointing out how silly or even evil I think a political belief or ideology or candidate is? Even if there is some legitimate folly associated with something, a quick share of a meme that doesn't consider that is not walking in wisdom towards outsiders. And the nature of social media, not always helpful to us when it comes to evangelism. It's too easy to click without thinking or without reading the whole article, right? You read the title and you like it and you share it, but you didn't read the whole thing. And it's too easy to type something in anger or frustration, not realizing all the outsiders that are going to see that. Let me ask you this. What are you going to do next month when your candidate does not win the presidency? That's going to be true for some Christian. It would be really sad if something that I carelessly posted became an obstacle to a future conversation about the Lord. I really, really hope that we all hear this and we really take this to heart. The conversation about the Lord is always the more important one. Conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders. So now we're going to look at the last phrase. Last phrase I want us to think about in verse 6. Let your speech always be gracious. So we've gone from prayers to conduct, finally our speech. And the instruction is that our speech should be gracious. In fact, it's supposed to be seasoned a certain way too, isn't it? All right? Now that leads me to believe that it's not just what we say. It's not just the words that we speak, but it is how we say it. I just don't want to say the right things. I want to say the right things well. And we all know that in conversations about spiritual things, it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes conversations heat up, people get angry, and it can turn from a discussion into a verbal battlefield, not very constructive at all. Paul says our speech should always be gracious. Always. We really need to sit on that concept for a while. My words are always supposed to be gracious, seasoned like salt, because my goal for these conversations with this outsider should be to take this unique opportunity with this unique person in this unique setting and say just what is needed in the moment in just the right way. This afternoon before coming over here, some of us, we had some barbecue. At Mission Barbecue. Steve was like saying, well, we could go here, we go here, we go here, we go Mission Barbecue. Yes, Mission Barbecue. Man, I love a good brisket. You know somebody that's into brisket, like they make their own, they do their own rub. Oh man, a good brisket, it is just science and art and magic all put together. They know, that person that's really into it though, they know just how to prep that rub so that when it's done, the flavor is just right. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. They mix it together. They process it for just the right time. They spread it on right. They make sure that it's smoked for just the right time. They know how to put it all together. Yeah, that's Colossians 4:6. When we talk to outsiders, the goal is to say just the right thing, the thing that is needed in that moment in just the right way. That sounds challenging, doesn't it? But that's the challenge from Paul. Because things that are important, they are challenging and they take some preparation. So when it comes to talking with outsiders, I might need to prepare myself to do what verse 6 is talking about. We need to know who our audience is. Just who are these people that I'm talking to? Who are they? Where are they on this spiritual scale? What questions are they going to have for me? What challenges are they probably going to present me with? Maybe to better prepare ourselves for this conversation, maybe we start with not what am I going to say, but maybe we just be quiet for a little while and we listen to people. Maybe I don't start with a statement. Maybe I start with a question. Oh, really? Tell me why you think that. And then listen. How did you come to that conclusion? And then listen. Maybe that's all the first conversation is, just listening. And then when they're done, you can say, wow, that's really interesting. Can I think a little bit more about this and get with you again? That's going to help us to speak with grace, to make sure that we say just the right thing. Now, our impulse is usually to think like, what am I going to say? And then when they're talking, what we're really doing is we're just kind of lining up our next arguments, and we're not really listening. Guilty. Maybe prepare yourself not to speak, but just to be quiet and listen. They're going to notice that. And I also need to prepare myself for when those conversations get heated. It's probably going to happen sooner or later, because we have a culture right now where lines are drawn, and if you don't agree, you are the enemy. And I don't care what the topic is. And right now, things are a little bit hostile towards what disciples believe. And sometimes when somebody gets a sense of what I believe and where this conversation is probably going, sometimes those defenses come right up and things get heated off the bat. You've seen those moments before. You've probably sat in some of those moments before. What's my responsibility then? Let your speech always be gracious. I know it's easier said than done. But that's the goal. Yeah, but what if they're mean? What if they are deliberately trying to hurt me, make me look stupid, undermine me, undermine Jesus in some way? Let your speech always be gracious. Prepare yourself for that ahead of time. And you know what? That's probably going to surprise them. It might change their viewpoint in hindsight. And they might walk away thinking, that didn't go the way that I thought it would. Yeah, it's true. Josh and I ended up not agreeing. But he wasn't cruel about it. He listened. That's speaking with grace. That's walking in wisdom. I need to think about what I say. I need to think about my speech in every interaction with lost people. It's one of the most crucial things I can do when it comes to Jesus' expectation of leading others to him. I need to think about my prayers. I need to pray more for lost people. And I don't just mean that generically. I mean specifically. This lost person I'm bringing before God. This lost person I am bringing before God. I hope you will join me in trying to do that better next week. I need to think about how I'm behaving before them. Am I a light? Am I letting my light shine before them in person and online? Maybe I need to think about that the next time I grab my keyboard in response to that idiot from the other political party. And I need to think about my words. Are they always gracious? And are they what's needed in the moment? Am I being wise in my relationship with outsiders? In just a moment, we're going to sing number 813, Just As I Am. And that's how Jesus will take you. Jesus will meet you exactly where you are. but he loves you too much for you to stay there. Do you know why this matters so much, brothers and sisters? Because souls matter. You and I, we get to partner with God in the most important work that's happening on the face of the earth. Nothing is more important than helping people get to heaven. Man, doctors are awesome. I'm thankful for doctors. But do you know what happens to that patient that brilliant doctor saved? The patient's still going to die eventually. Nothing is more important than helping people get to heaven. And that's why we really need to think about, we really need to talk about our relationship with lost people. And that's also why there's always some kind of an invitation at a talk like this, because there is nothing that's more important than people getting to heaven. And maybe you're sitting here right now. I said it last night. I'll say it again tonight. I recognize most of the faces that are out here, but I'm not going to say that I know where you are with God. And maybe you're sitting here right now and you just know. You know. If the trumpet sounds today, if today is the day that Jesus comes back, it is not going to go well for me. What a terrible burden to carry. And that's why God, through Jesus, offers you the opportunity to take that from you. And that's what we want to encourage you to do. Maybe you committed, maybe you made a commitment in the past to follow Jesus, but you wandered away. Maybe you need to decide for the very first time that you are going to commit to Jesus and follow him. Let go of that burden. Let him take it away. Life is stressful enough. What a weight is going to be lifted from your shoulders if you know you're right with God. And we want to help you do that if we can. I said it last night as well. I'm going to say it again. I urge you to do it before it is everlastingly too late. God will give you as many chances until he can't. I say this to young people all the time. Yeah, you can wait until the end of your life to get right with God, and you'll be right with God. Thing is, you just don't know when the end of your life is going to be. We could all name names. We can see faces of people who woke up not knowing that that was going to be their last day on earth. And we didn't know it either. He'll give you tomorrow until he can't. So take care of your soul today. If you feel compelled to take care of anything right now, you come forward. Someone will meet you down front while we stand and while we sing.